Hello and welcome to the Durham Talents channel. My name is Jesse Durham. Today I'm sitting down with several stupendous professionals to discuss Austrian economics, libertarianism, and what it all might have to do with the infinite banking concept. There are some new faces on today's roundtable, so I hope that you enjoy. All right, here's how we're starting it off. Richard holding up his books. Not that there aren't plenty of them behind Dan and Nicole and everybody else. Tricia is showing up. Okay, so today, everybody. Okay, so we've got so much ground to cover. This is such a big, multifaceted discussion that we're getting ready to have around libertarianism, Austrian economics, and of course, infinite banking. But let's do this. I would like to remind everybody that's watching that all the folks on here, all these great folks, have had a one-on-one introductory interview with me. So you can go to durhamtalents.com, you can go to the YouTube channel, and you can go to the interview series where you'll actually be able to listen to every single one of these folks' background story, their origin story with the infinite banking concept. I would encourage you to get to know them better and know how to reach them there on the interview series. I'm saying that just because this is the first time for a few folks. Yeah, it might just be you, Richard. Richard, you're the new guy, Richard. So that's interesting. You're the new guy.
There's a first time for everything.
Right. So if you would, just because you might be a new face for folks here at the round table anyway, certainly not new in the infinite banking space, but if somebody's seen you for the first time, would you let them know a little bit of your bio, please, sir?
Sure. August of 2009, a good friend of mine told me to go buy this book. I read it and it changed my life. And the last 17 some odd years of my life have been dedicated to teaching this message to the people I love and care about and anyone who will listen.
I love it. And it is always special for me when we can have someone in on any conversation who did personally get to meet Nelson. You might not be the only one, but I'm just saying that I'm mentioning that while I am thinking about that. Beautiful. All right. Y'all know what the topic is. Maybe we'll get to another one. There'll be a part 2, and then I hold something up my sleeve in reserve even after that. But I'll tell y'all this. Here's how I'll kick this off from my part, because I just want to get out of the way and save y'all from throwing verbal elbows at each other, because I know you got strong opinions and very valuable insights to share. I was introduced to Austrian economics, libertarianism via infinite banking. I know for lots of folks on here, Dan, you always jump in my mind, that's completely opposite for Dan. So I think that's really interesting. People's come from. See, it was because I got turned on to the infinite banking concept and I'm reading this book. And eventually I noticed all the things at the back of the book where Nelson is talking about, oh, you should check out this guy, check out that. And he does it throughout the book as well. So I do start reading things like The Law by Frederick Bastiat. And I do start. So there are several of them. I've not even read all of them. I've not even read all of Nelson's suggested reading. And I always think it's interesting that you can read books that influence somebody else who wrote their own book. I always think that's neat. But I got introduced to these two topics, okay, because of infinite banking. So giving credit where it's due, that's what opened up things for me. And then I'll say one more thing. And if anybody on here has not done this, or anybody watching has not done this, I think this kind of stuff's neat. You might not. Let me know down in the comments if you want to. I took a quiz a few years back, and there's probably more than one, but this quiz was showing some quadrants, okay? There were 4 quadrants, and essentially there was this range of, are you more liberal? Are you more conservative? And then, are you more authoritarian? Or are you more libertarian? And again, I'm taking this quiz, and I'm like, figuring out who I am, and okay, I lean this and I lean that, and I have these feelings around, wow, that was a really thought-provoking question. So I don't know if y'all, I'm saying that to say that, like, if y'all have ever taken anything like that, send it to me. Maybe I'll send you the link of the one that I've taken before. I think it's interesting to try and figure out, where do I stand on this, that, or the other. So that's a bit from me so that I can hand it over to y'all. You've all already been holding up books and stuff. Maybe that would be a great place to start. We can go in turn. Is there a book that you would highly suggest on either of these subjects? And we'll just go from there. Ladies first, let me start with you, Nicole. Is there any book that you would strongly suggest? Oh, yes, this one for me was a great one.
Really, it was going through the IBC practitioner program. So I kind of knew there would be Austrian economics in there and all of that. So that really awakened me to so much. So I would say go through the IBC practitioner program and read all those books that they tell you to read. And then it started making me dive deeper into what even is that? Yes, I've seen it, when I go to vote, but you feel like, oh, am I throwing away my vote voting for a libertarian candidate because, they're going to be a Democrat or Republican. So it just made me acknowledge more. And then the more I've been in this community and meeting people, following Dan, we haven't had a lot of one-on-one conversations, but just following some of the stuff that he has out there, it's just like more and more and more. So just kind of awakening to this not widely known political way of thinking. So that would be my suggestion. Just go through the IBC practitioner program.
I love it. Well, I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
Nicole, when I had my interview with David and Lee and then Carlos Lara, I was renewed in my conviction of my responsibility in conveying the infinite banking message to include or to point out the bigger, not bigger implications, but also to remind people that that is something. I mean, that's just me trying to say it in the way that I discovered it. It's like, oh, that's a thing, libertarianism. Anyway, I had a renewed conviction. That's what I'm saying. I'm going to keep going like I am. You gave a great recommendation, Nicole. Tricia, I'd be curious to know maybe what, and it doesn't have to be a book if you know of a podcast, and I'll get to you, Dan. But what about for you, Tricia?
I'm going to keep it a little bit simpler than Nicole and say, go read the Tuttle Twin books. I mean, just for a simple overview resource written for children, but the very first place I read the law was in the Tuttle Twin version. I Pencil, right? The Creature from Jekyll Island. If you start reading just those really simple children's books, it's eye-opening. And then from there, go grab you the real book, right? But I think that's a great resource. I have enjoyed those. I would say I was introduced to libertarianism probably back when there was such a thing as the Constitution Party. I don't know when that was, 25 or 30 years ago. And it's been a long time since I ever voted Republican as a result. But, it is always that question of, are you throwing away your vote? But to think about it this way, I was listening to something recently, the difference in some ways between conservatism and libertarianism. Libertarianism is really quite simple, right? Don't bring harm to anyone else and don't steal their stuff. Pretty simple. But conservatism, I think there's like some confusion between that, is this idea of less government, less regulation, but it's just comparative. Less than what? So what might be considered conservative today might actually be quite liberal from the past. And even that word is confusing because I think our founding fathers considered themselves liberals because they were deriving that from the term liberty. So words change, ideas, move and evolve, and it can just get a little bit confusing. But I found that very clarifying. This, as a definition of libertarianism, is just not bringing harm to anyone else and not taking their stuff, having the free liberty. Like, so even if I don't agree with your choices, if you're not harming someone else, it's like saying it's not the government's jurisdiction to fix that. Maybe it's the churches to speak into it or the community, but it's not the government's jurisdiction. So just a different way of thinking. But start with the Tuttle Twins.
I agree. Love the Tuttle Twins. We've used those with our children, and it's interesting what they retain and the things that they ask you about and where the conversations can go as a whole, as a family. You said so much there, Tricia. My goodness. And that's where I feel, again, like something like somebody taking a quiz is interesting because I might have a very conservative view about X, Y, or Z. But because of my libertarian leaning when it comes to authoritarian versus libertarian, I'm more than okay with letting you do what it is that you want to do if I hold a different view, because I'm not trying to impose myself upon you, even though if you were to ask me, hey Jesse, what do you think? What's your view about XRC? Oh, I don't mind telling you. And it'll be different from yours perhaps, but that doesn't mean that I'm trying to intervene in your life or help a government to do that. So
Let me
boy,
just
there's
say
a
something
lot.
about those quizzes, though. Like so many times you take these political quizzes. I had one show up, I don't know, somewhere on social media recently. And I'm just so frustrated because I'm like, you're not even asking the right questions. I can't answer this because it's either or. There's no third option. And my view would require a different question. So
All right, so now or
Or the
later, then
type
you'll
in
have to tell
response.
me what that, because I want to know what that question is now. So you'll have to tell me sometime.
oh, there were many of them. Yeah, I'll have to look at that. I don't know if I
I'll-
could find it even, but
I'll bet you so. Richard, you were going to say something, and I was coming to you next anyway, since you're the first time guest on the roundtable. Go ahead.
I just thought it'd be interesting, Tricia, for you to put the type in response option. Almost any quiz I'm looking for. Well, what's the one where I get to write my own answer?
right.
And then even if it's not what you're looking for the, when they're marking the quiz, it's going to get the person marking the quiz to maybe think differently because they didn't know someone would put in another response. Even back in school, I used to do that. I used to type in something. I'm like, well, none of, because of, and I would provide my own response. And then I would go and fight with the teacher and justify my answer. Say, well, your question is inaccurate because you're missing this and you're missing this. And therefore, and so I would often have to get a pass or fight to negotiate. So I learned some of my sales and negotiating skills in the public school system by fighting for higher marks because they had more questions. And that was a common challenge. I'm sure maybe some of you might be familiar with. So ultimately, probably some degree of my libertarian leaning mindset actually came very early in life, and I just didn't know what it was. And much like you, Jesse, I was introduced to Austrian economics through Nelson as well. I attended my first think tank conference and met Nelson. I actually attended. Nelson used to do his 2 day seminar. It was the evening before a full day, and then right after that, you would have the 2 day think tank event. So I did that, I think 3 times in a row before Nelson stopped doing that. It got kind of too busy, too much for them to put all that event on. And 2012, literally February, we're in February at the time of this recording. That was roughly when I met Nelson in 2012 for the first time. And sitting with him going to his seminar, it was the equivalent of like having a new hard drive dropped in your head. It was really something else. And we sat kind of front row. It was a small room. There was maybe 25 people in the room. And it was just phenomenal. Nelson had big tent cards with everyone's name on it. He always liked to include everyone. He would call everybody out. He wanted to see your name. He would engage with you in the conversation. And it was really impressive. And in fact, so earlier, Jesse, I was holding up some books. So I've got Frederick Bastiat, The Law, right here. A nice little thin, very quick, easy read. And I got this from Nelson's personal library. Nelson gave me this copy. I have this book. It's called Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard. Again, very small, thin book. And, the imagery is of anatomy of a human body, but the reference point is the anatomy of the state. And the state isn't the government. It's this kind of bloated organism that intertwines itself throughout everything. And it doesn't have exact form or an exact department because it intertwines throughout the entire body of government. That's the concept of the anatomy of the state. And this is a phenomenal, great little read that'll really start to get someone thinking differently about how, even in the life insurance world, we talk about something I refer to as big dumb company syndrome. Have you guys ever heard that before? You ever engage with an organization that's kind of too big for its own good, too big for its britches, and it just kind of doesn't know what it's doing because there's too many people and too many departments, and the telephone rings over here to someone on the other side of the building, and they're talking about 2 different things and nothing ever happens? That's called big dumb company syndrome. Well, even life insurance companies have that happen, but most certainly it happens in giant organizations like government. Doesn't matter if it's a municipal, a state, provincial, federal level government. These things all exist in that format because of all the different variations and departments. Kind of talks about that here in this organization, in this book. Here's another one with Murray Rothbard, also from Nelson's library. So Nelson gave me these books, so I kind of treasure these. Economic Depressions, Their Causes and Their Cures. Again, nice little thin kind of, these are more like essays and pamphlets, really, like really in-depth essays, kind of put in books. And then I've got Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson here. Now, these are kind of fundamental things. You can see I'm holding up like smaller editions of books. You can get these giant like troves, like monstrous copies to really dig into this stuff if you're interested in that. I like to keep my reading a little bit more light. I like to try to keep it as simple as I can. And if you understand the core fundamentals or the first principles, it can allow you to move forward with some better thinking, in my opinion. And so somebody, I think Tricia, maybe it was you that mentioned, iPencil. iPencil is, in my opinion, one of the greatest little essays ever written by Leonard Read. Leonard Read was Nelson's mentor. And you can go and get copies. So you can get free PDF of it, of course, available on the Mises Institute website. You can go to mises.org and get it there. But they actually created a documentary film for this, a small little film. It's all animated. I think it's about 8 minutes or 9 minutes. And it walks through the journey of the creation of a pencil, because no single person, no one on this call, Jesse's got a tomahawk in the background, Dan's got a bunch of wood in the background. Nobody on this call knows how to make a pencil. I don't have the materials to craft a pencil. And in order to get those materials, in order to put everything in place, to be in a position where I can have the shape, the lead, the type of wood that's necessary, the little metal piece on the end, what's necessary for the eraser, it would be impossible for me to do that without connecting with multiple other countries, industries, organizations, people, workers on the other side of the country to go and get all the pieces together to craft a single pencil. So that one story, that one thing helps you recognize the degree to which we have interconnectedness, and that a person on the other side of the world, their prosperity, their ability to do work or generate revenue or income is directly relevant to something I might want to have, purchase, and the business that sells it may need to have as inventory for us all to prosper together. And so that one simple story and the mystery of how everything comes together to be created through this a magical world of commerce and true entrepreneurialism is really told in iPencil. And in an 8-minute video and a very short read, you can have a real true glimpse of how economics works from that vantage point. That's a great entry point for people if they're trying to figure out what is this thing called Austrian economics. And we're talking about libertarianism and Austrian economics, and sometimes they're used in the same sentence as though they're the same thing. Well, they're not the same thing. They're two different things, but they're often associated because the libertarian mindset is about personal liberty. And if you manufacture as much and attain as much personal liberty because you have it and you have it, Nicole has it and David has it and Dan and Tricia and Will, everyone has it. And we are abiding by that responsibility, the responsibility that personal liberty requires in order to maintain its capacity. And we're all doing it. Well, then we're all working for our own self-interest. But by the virtue of doing that, we have to work together so that we support one another in this collaborative environment, which is defined in the iPencil story. Does that make sense? So if you recognize that you have to have personal responsibility so that you can have personal liberty, and it needs to be that you have the right to have that. But in order to utilize it properly, you have to work collaboratively with others in order to prosper. And by default, they also must prosper because they're in the same boat as you. That's, in my opinion, the fundamental core elements of what libertarianism is about. And then to take that one step further, that personal liberty goes to something that Tricia mentioned, which is basically don't take my stuff and I won't take your stuff. Okay. So your stuff is your stuff. That's called property rights, private property rights. That is a fundamental core tenet of personal liberty and having the personal responsibility of. So if someone tries to take my stuff, which would now cause me harm, so do no harm to others. So if I try to take Tricia's stuff, I'm doing harm to her and her family. she has the right to now defend herself of that. That is some of the core elements. And these are really simple principles. These are first principles. They go to the core of liberty. And the nation of the United States fundamentally was founded on those beliefs.
Absolutely. Okay. Am I the only one? I know I'm going back, but am I the only one who questions Richard's Canadian use of too big for your britches? I mean, was it his southern trips to come see Nelson where he picks up these types of things? I just wonder.
I like to speak to my audience as much as I can. Yeah.
That's it. Good.
Nobody
good read
would say
on your
too
part.
big for your toque, but
See there, I knew there had to be something, some other variation. All right. I think I'm planning some ideas. I think we ought to keep mentioning some Austrians so that people who are interested in this subject can continue their own perusal, their own study, their own discovery. Because like you said, Mises earlier, Richard, that's Mises. So just throwing that out there. Personal liberty, personal responsibility. We're going to talk about free market, I'm sure, at one point in this discussion. But let's keep going. Dan, do you have books, podcasts, YouTube channel, anything that you'd like to reference? And then, of course, any highlights to keep this going. And I don't know, do we need to consolidate into, are we going to just speak to liberty? I'm not trying to confine y'all. I'm just asking, keeping it open, libertarianism and Austrian economics, or maybe we'll tackle one at a time. But you share your thoughts, your input, Dan. Get us started.
Well, I think just to speak to what Richard just said, what I love about iPencil is that it's a beautiful picture of the free market, and in contrast to centralized planning. And that's what I think he was trying to depict. Leonard Reed was like, look how this all works, this web of, in some sense, it kind of looks like anarchy because you don't have a central planner putting together all these pieces. And that's why I think, in my opinion, God's economy would be more reflected by everyone serving each other in this web of specialization. This guy's digging lead out from the lead mines, and you have this guy working over here to get the rubber, and all these people are working together, but they don't know it. They don't know that, and then all this stuff comes together eventually in the form of a pencil that's like 19 cents, versus like a government trying to somehow do this through central planning just doesn't work. But as far as like a book, I would just emphasize just going back to the Bible and looking at what it has to say about like false weights and measures. That's a big principle when it comes to Austrian economics, sound money. And so God hates false weights and measures. He wants it to be honest. And I think there's a problem with our banking system, the fractional reserve system, where some people in our society, the banks, are allowed to commit this kind of legalized counterfeiting. It's been legalized. And so it's institutional at this point. And so it's this like institutionalized sin, if you want to call it that we're used to, we're all saturated in it. So it's harder to overcome and defeat, So I would just like to speak to that. I think also with the Bible, if you look through the Bible, you see empires all over the place. You see Assyria, you see Babylon, you see Rome and Caesar. And so I think the question of governments, it has to be a conversation within economics, because growing up I just grew up with my grandfather was also mentored by Leonard Reed, and my dad was involved in fee as well. And there is just this free market world, but now growing up in that as a third generation, I'm trying to think, okay, so you're saying every time the government gets involved and intervenes, it basically causes some kind of distortion, right? Okay, but you're saying it has to be there, right? And so there is this conversation that needs to be had between limited government and no government. And people get really scared by that thought. You can go down to 1% government, right? And they're kind of okay with that. But if you take away that 1%, then they get all freaked out. But that's what was so beautiful about Rothbard. Rothbard, I think, put the same rigorous analysis towards politics and the whole concept of government that he did to the economics. And so there's two different branches of Austrians, the way I understand it. You have the classical Austrians like Mises and Hayek, but then you have the libertarian Austrians, which is like Rothbard and Hermann Hoppe. And so those guys were basically, I think, being more consistent, the libertarians, and they're applying more of an ethical argument that the government, this is like that it's inherently bad, that there's a certain ethical evil that's being committed by this fraudulent system. And so I think at some point you have to deal with the ethics. And if we're going to go to ethics, what better place than going back to the Bible to see what does the Bible really have to say about all these issues?
I agree. The one example that I'll say, because I know you're all chomping at the bit as well, is when Israel decided to have a king and they had their first king, Lord told them, said, he's going to take your stuff. He's going to enslave your children to serve him. You know, it's just the whole do no harm, leave other people's stuff alone. It's like, if you go in that direction, that's what's going to happen. That's what it's going to look like. So interesting.
Yeah.
Will, David, y'all been super patient. Will, let me go to you. Books, podcasts, thoughts in general.
I first found libertarian economics kind of going back to the book Ed and the Fed and the Fair Tax back 2007, 2008 timeframe. All kind of intuitively made sense to me. You can't spend more than you make, and debt's bad. But didn't really like click and like start becoming like Austrian, like understanding Austrian economics until finding IBC and getting a copy of How Privatized Banking Really Works. I read Nelson's book first, but the whole IBC concept actually clicked for me with the morality of it when I read How Privatized Banking Really Works. And that's what has kind of driven me more. Libertarianism, from what I'm gathering, you were saying this same thing there, Dan. There's kind of a spectrum to it from what I'm gathering. I've never really called myself a libertarian, because it kind of, for some of the negative connotations with it of each man doing what is right in his own eyes, which repeated at the end of basically every chapter in the book of Judges. It's not a good thing. We need something. But the libertarianism, I guess I would prescribe to, is not a no or small government like anarchy end of the spectrum. It's an appropriate sized government that is operating only within its God-assigned sphere. It's not stepping outside of those bounds. And it might be larger in some areas and smaller in others. Where other books that I've just really enjoyed, Guido Hülsmann's book, The Ethics of Money Production. He goes into a lot of the moral argument, drawing on scripture, Christian tradition. There's one of the chapters is pulled out as an article on Mises.org, How Inflation Destroys Civilization. And most of the books that all of us have been mentioning for the reader or the listeners, you can get them for free on Mises.org as PDF files. Libertarianism, I guess I would prescribe to. We've been talking about it. It's the personal responsibility, the moral obligation, seeing how my actions within the economy, the system, fiat currency, fractional reserve banking, are actively harming my neighbor, actively harming myself, actively harming future generations. And, we're commanded to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Love is not just being nice and your neighbor liking you. It's actively doing what is in their physical and spiritual best interest. So if I'm participating in these systems that are actively harming them, then I'm violating the second greatest commandment.
So we would all encourage everybody to secede from the conventional financial system, at least as a starter, or consider that, right? Becoming your own banker. That's one thing that unifies us. There's a lot there. I know Dan even started to jump in. Will I want to as well? I'm trying to give everybody at least one solid go to get something out there, right? And then it's just going to be free for all. I understand that. David, books, podcasts, your experience with being exposed to these concepts. What's your background?
Yeah. So I come at this, I studied economics in college, and until I was introduced to other economic philosophies, which was only born from being introduced to the book and then all the books that are recommended in the back, is I always thought we lived in a world of like Milton Friedman versus John Maynard Keynes and Keynesian economics. And until I read the book, I didn't realize what the real backbone of what Nelson really created the system around was this idea of that what I find from Austrian economics, the one book that actually that come to my mind that really resonated with me was a book by Eustace Mullins called The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, which basically talks about how the Federal Reserve is not a governmental agency, but it's actually it was a private elite controlled institution that was cobbled together at Jekyll Island. Barry Dyke writes it in his book about how there was a very concentrated amount of wealth back then, and that wealth needed to be protected by the Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, and such. So that resonates with me from an economic standpoint, because we're seeing a lot of, even today, I'm going to try to bring it into today, because here in the United States, there's always a lot of talk about the Federal Reserve and what the function of the Federal Reserve should or shouldn't be. So Nelson would say the Federal Reserve should have no way and say in the direction of our economic system. It's really there just to moderate the ups and the downs, and it shouldn't be something that is policed by some sovereignty. What do you want to call it? The president. It's supposed to be independent, but that's a book that resonates with me. I would suggest to all the readers that want to know, because we hear a lot about the Federal Reserve in a lot of the news that we hear about and we read about economically. I think it would be important for people to understand why that was created and the importance of it in today's society. And
one of the most important ideas that iPencil explores is spontaneous order. But what
Is that me playing that?
That was me. I was pulling up Richard's thing. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. I'd also been trying to monitor the chat and text myself these links so I can come back to them. I'm like, oh man, did I hit the button? All right. I appreciate everything that you were saying there, David. Barry Dyke, I've really enjoyed listening to him before. He's been hosted lots of times on the Banking with Life podcast. That's where I got introduced to him. Again, because of infinite banking, I got introduced to these bigger conversations around economics. I'm in the middle. Here's a travesty. You said it, David, talking about folks maybe have heard of Keynes, in Keynesian economics, folks maybe have heard of, okay, but there's a Chicago school, Milton Friedman. I've enjoyed listening to Milton Friedman on different things. You can find recordings on YouTube, but I'm in the middle, right in the dead middle of a very interesting documentary right now on monetary policy, precious metals, inflation, the Fed, just really, really cool stuff. And the guy says something about Keynes, says something about Chicago school, and then I'm waiting for it, and then he quits talking about economics. And I'm like, okay, but is that the dangling of a carrot? Maybe we'll hear about that in the next video in this series of documentary that I'm watching, or are you just another person who's very knowledgeable about lots of things, but perhaps have a void that I think is worth noting, and that's why we're having this conversation. Okay, I've given everybody a fair chance to say something. It's an open floor right now. We've covered a lot of ground, mentioned a lot of names, recommended a lot of great books, podcasts, and such. I don't know. I kind of don't know how to field something so big. I just know that this is important to me, like I've said, because I've applied infinite banking for over a decade. I got introduced to Austrian economics and libertarian thinking and such because of implementing a private family banking system as a paradigm in my life, okay, for 10 plus years. I continue to study this and I continue to want to have conversations around this. And everybody just jumped, when I said, hey, I want to have a conversation on the round table about this. Nobody's arm had to be twisted to be here. Everybody's like, Jesse, can we align this? And so what would you like to convey if you had, a chance to talk to anybody who you see is here now, which is always something really cool. I feel like when you show up at a round table, you don't know who else is going to be there, or to the public at large. What do people need to know? What topics would you like to raise up in these themes?
I'd like to bring up one thing about libertarianism. I would like to add one thing to it. So it's don't harm your neighbor, don't take their stuff. And I would just like to challenge us to think about the idea of responding to evil by not taking vengeance against our neighbors when something evil takes place. And I think there's this idea that the government is a sword, or at least that's the way the Bible references government, that it's a sword, right? So if we are all debating about how we're going to use this sword, and that's it, I just don't see where there is some kind of reconciliation or some way of peace, like the right and the left or whatever. Everyone wants to use the sword to do what they want to do. But you don't hear many voices saying maybe we should just put this whole idea of the sword to rest, or let's challenge that idea. And so how does the Bible tell us to respond to evil would be a question that I'd throw out there and maybe have us think about, because I think once we get there, then we can really talk about how we can really change things. Otherwise, I just don't see any end to the sword and choosing violence, because that's what government is. It's basically a monopoly of coercion and violence of threats. And I agree with Will that we need something, right? But I don't think it has to be a monopoly of violence, which is what the state is defined as in political science, right? So that's why Rothbard wrote these books, because he's showing how it can be done. How basically he invented the term anarcho-capitalism, which is this 100% capitalist society that can function and do everything without government getting in the way.
Great word to introduce. That's the first time it's been mentioned, anarcho-capitalism. It's not been so very long, 2-3 years, I don't know, that I was introduced to that word. Glad you said it. I'm going to let Dan's question stand. What is the response to evil? I have strong views, depending perhaps, Dan, if we're talking about X, Y, or Z. You give me and I'm the kind of guy where I'm like, well, what do you mean? Give me an example, right? And if you give me an example, I might give you, I don't know, I might give you an answer that would surprise you. Maybe not, but in general, what should be the response then to evil?
Well, I'll give an example because it ties to something that David and Tricia and everyone was sharing, and that is the Federal Reserve, the money printing aspect, and Nelson. Having multiple conversations with him. The last time I sat in Nelson's office, Nelson's office was filled with books, not unlike what Dan sees in the background there. He had a wall full of them, and he had a table that was about 3 inches thick of wood, coffee table. And around the table, there was stacks of books that was about a foot tall, multiple stacks on the circumference of the table. And they all had Post-it notes in them and flags. And Nelson was giving them away. People would come over and he was like, these ones I selected for you. And you would leave with a stack of books. And he was trying to pass on what he had learned in the knowledge to other people. That's really what he was doing, in kind of some of those final years. It was quite interesting. Thinking about it, thinking back on it. But Nelson believed that the banking cartels, and he thought of them essentially as organized mobsters, was evil. And he believed that, from my perspective and what he shared with me, that the fact that they're manufacturing or manipulating the monetary supply, in essence, is evil. And so that could be one area of evil that we could address, similar to what Dan was talking about. And so therefore, one of the ways to combat that is through the implementation of the infinite banking concept at the personal level. So one of the reasons the infinite banking concept has been described as Austrian economics in action. So Austrian economics being the economic thought process, how do you apply it in action? Well, there's how do you apply it in action at a macro level, you know, at a state, at a government, at a nation level, at a global level, at a city level. How do you apply it at the individual level? Well, the infinite banking concept and participating in the idea, which is voluntary, one of the principles of a libertarian mindset, is something that you can choose to implement. And by doing so, you become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And the solution being, we have a manipulation of monetary supply created by central banking entities. The Federal Reserve being one of them. Well, David, you mentioned Eustace Mullins and Secrets of the Federal Reserve. It's a really cool gold foiled book. It's very complicated to read, in my opinion. It's not a simple, easy read. So unless you want to get really into the weeds, maybe you would choose The Creature of Jekyll Island, which is a much easier read. And coincidentally, was mostly inspired by The Secrets of the Federal Reserve. So you have The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, very in the weeds, very detail oriented. You have The Creature from Jekyll Island, much easier read, gives you the conceptual overview. And then you have the Tuttle Twins version of The Creature of Jekyll Island. So you could kind of go through the iterations to get the fundamental principles there. The Creature being the Federal Reserve, which was created on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. So that is what we're talking about here. And that creature is a thing that allows for manipulation of the monetary supply fundamentally. And the way it allows to do it is by providing the commercial banking sector the ability to manufacture money that doesn't necessarily exist. And that money doesn't come into being. One of the things that people don't really realize is that the money doesn't come into being until someone signs on a document that says, I want to borrow some. So the creation of money is often created with the stroke of a pen, but it's your pen. It's the individual's pen that creates it, because we're creating a promise to repay on a dollar value that didn't exist with real money, with real work and real labor that must be generated to make payments on something that was fictitious. Does that kind of make sense fundamentally? And so the moment that there's two ways that you can secede, we talked about secession. The two ways you can secede from that particular evil is to take personal responsibility of your financial element relative to you and your family members, people that depend on you, by slowly shifting your depository requirements. You're not leaving money on deposit with a traditional commercial bank. The deposit allows them to manufacture money. And you're not borrowing money, which means you're reducing the creationary aspect by choosing to do that with an entity, this being an insurance company that you co-own, the entity that is not allowed to manipulate, manufacture, or create money. It can only work with real dollars, real debits and credits fundamentally. So that is one way that if you wanted to take the personal responsibility, you wanted to fight against a particular evil, you can do so by choosing to participate voluntarily in the infinite banking concept.
I do love it when I've heard in video where Nelson would be asking somebody and he would say, well, okay, if you go to work this week and you get paid on Friday, is that real money or fake money? Now, I'm not talking about it being a fiat currency, right? Like technically, and here's where we could just, we can just get real particular. It's actually a fiat currency. It's not money, it's currency, and it's a fiat. But it's real money, meaning a real person really went and did real work and was provided a value of compensation for that. Okay? That's real money. That's an interaction where there's real money. If I want to open up a business line of credit with the bank, real or not real? Well, that's not real. That's what you were just describing there, Richard. So just trying to give, because I got folks that are in their first year or second year of implementing infinite banking that are going to be listening to this conversation. And in my first or second year of implementing infinite banking, I was really still just like laser focused. Hey, I've got student loans to pay off. I've got a car to pay off. I need to pay off credit cards. I need to build up legacy for my family. But I'm beginning to hear these bigger picture items like what we're talking about right here. So I'm just trying to put out some real life examples there of things that you provoked me to think about.
If I could chime in for a minute about the Federal Reserve and fractional banking system, is that again what Barry Dyke's book was much more simpler than Eustace Mullins, is the idea that what happened was that banks were now given special privileges, right? And then basically they were tools that were created to manipulate. So fractional banking, when that came to be, this became like almost state enabled and crisis driven.
Yeah.
And then over time, as any other system that where whoever holds the gold, right, makes the rules. This is what, these are the rules in my personal opinion that have run amok over time. And this is why we as practitioners want to help the public and our clients be able to retake the gold that they've abdicated over time, whether they realize it or not.
David, could you keep talking about that fractional banking that you mentioned right there? Because again, folks might have read Becoming Your Own Banker and have a level of understanding. Folks might still be vetting the concept. Speak to that a little more, please.
Sure. So the fractional reserve banking system, as we know it today, is a tool by which the bankers are able to take a dollar of value and be able to stretch it legally to a point where they can expand the money supply system arbitrarily and be able to take a dollar and stretch it in ways that were never meant to be stretched, which again, we could talk about how that would create inflation. But the idea is, Jesse, a dollar is now worth $11 or $12 that a bank can now use to be able to create other flows of money that will flow interest to the bank in the form of mortgages, automobile loans, small business loans, anything that will create economy in the form of interest to the banking system. And that's really what Federal Reserve banking, from what my understanding is really all about. So,
beautiful. Richard's had a great idea. We've got so many people on here. He actually virtually raised his hand so that we'll know. And so did Tricia.
I'll be quick to this because I love David's point. And so for people to think back, well, originally you would have like jewelers and goldsmiths and things where people would go and they would have physical gold or bullion and coins and things. And well, if you're traveling on the road with a horse and a bag and a satchel and there's bandits, you may not want to carry all of your wealth with you because you could literally lose all your wealth being robbed on the road or something of that nature. And so you could keep it at safekeeping at a place that eventually became the concept of a bank, somewhere where we have a vault, we have safekeeping, we have guards, we have bars and locks and things. It's really hard for people to break into our establishment because we have so much wealth here. And then, why don't you just leave your gold and your things here and we will issue you this piece of paper that indicates a representation of what you have, and you could bring the piece of paper back and claim it. Well, and eventually people started trading the pieces of paper because they were easier to carry and harder to steal than carrying around a bunch of heavy gold and bullion and so on. So that's kind of how like paper money kind of sort of got created. It actually got created by consumer demand. So consumers created the first paper money fundamentally as a convenience. Well, it's still convenient. It's now digitally convenient. But the same concept applied. Well, what people started to realize in these establishments now known as effectively banks is that not everybody came because they're exchanging all the paper. It's very rare that people are coming in and bringing the paper and exchanging it for what we actually have. So maybe we could issue more pieces of paper. We're not getting any more of the gold, but let's create some more paper, in which case they're devaluing There's more paper circulating than what they actually have on hand. And so that would only become a problem if there was a run on the bank, when everyone brings the paper in and says, give me my stuff, but there's too many pieces of paper and not enough stuff. So if you break it down kind of from the past simplistic view, that's how things were then. It's still the same today. The difference is the scale is astronomical to what would become a run on the bank, because there's not enough deposit element relative to how much money is circulating.
Right. So the market came up with a good idea of, hey, it would be easier if we used paper, but then interjects the human problem of dishonesty, right? And then there's the problem. Okay, Tricia, you had your hand up. Will does too. Tricia, you were first.
Okay, there's so many things I could say here, and I don't know how to start and not overwhelm or take us down too many rabbit holes. But there's when we're talking about libertarianism, we're kind of touching on political viewpoints. When we're talking about Austrian economics, we're talking about the financial side of things and how they're so intertwined. And of course, I think at some point we'll talk about how those are maybe represented in the infinite banking concept. But just going back politically a little bit, in the beginning of our country, I think, I could be wrong, I think it was Benjamin Franklin who came out and said, after signing the Declaration of Independence, or maybe it was after the crafting of the Constitution, we've given you a republic if you can keep it, right? So even back when I was talking about libertarianism being, don't harm someone else, and what was the other thing I said?
Don't steal their stuff.
Don't steal their stuff, right? All of that, like all of the original liberties that we declared and won for ourselves in the beginning of this country was based on things like the Magna Carta. I mean, there's so much history here, right? And based on, and even that was based on the Word of God as being kind of the foundation, right? We got our rights from God. And so there's this idea that if you can keep it, you do have to have a virtue, that personal responsibility to love your neighbor in order to keep it. And, I'm not sure that we have succeeded very well in that. And I think that's why that was the question, can you keep it? But also right after the founding of our country, the whole central banking thing was immediately an issue. And, we've had recently the musical Hamilton, right? And he's made out to be this wonderful guy, but he was pro-central bank. And then that was taken away. But then later down the road in our history, again, we see that the Federal Reserve was created, and it's no mistake. So I'm trying to tie like the whole government piece of it with the financial piece of it. It is no coincidence that the Federal Reserve and the IRS were both established in 1913. Take it a little further, in 1916, you have a birth certificate. And whether people realize it or not, we truly are, like when Nelson talks about the snakes and dragons, and I almost wonder, Richard, how much you know from having I wish I could have a personal conversation with Nelson, because I remember the first time, and I've said this before, when I heard him talk about snakes and dragons, I just thought, who is this guy? Is he just some quaint old Southern fellow that just has some funny ways of talking about bankers? And the more I have learned and the more I have realized, no, he was not kidding. Snakes and dragons, he's really talking about pure evil. They have, and it's not federal and there's no reserves, right? But they have turned us into bond slaves. Slavery has not left us. And if you feel it today, we're on a treadmill that cannot keep up with that inflation. And it is just turning, we're in a type of slave labor. We may not recognize that, but we truly are. And if you consider this piece of they get to print the money, they didn't have to put forward any labor of their own to lend you those funds. They just print it at will, like you said, with the stroke of your pen. Can you imagine stepping in their shoes for a minute and I get to just, you asked me for a loan and out of thin air, I can give it to you. And now you can go work really hard and pay it back to me with interest. If you think about that on a personal level, I think, get blinded to it because it's a system that we live in. I mean, that is evil. And then we say, oh, that amount of money is not enough anymore. We're going to print more money, greater supply, more demand, keep working harder. And, it's going to cost you more next time. And so I don't know where I was going with all of this, but there's so many ideas, I guess. Just thinking through some of this, the infinite banking concept, and just beginning to get glimpses of this Austrian economics, libertarianism probably more in depth than I've ever learned it in the past. The banking system, the way money and currency works, fiat currency, it opens your eyes to a whole lot of things. And I think a lot of people are waking up to just the evil nature of the system that we are living in. And, I think there's two things there. We need to definitely not forget that our rights come from God, that it does require personal responsibility. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. And the more we lose that, the more we lose our freedoms. They are tied intimately. And it's just also this idea of withdrawing from the system and not feeding it any further. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents.
No, I love it. I love the shotgun approach. And as soon as you said, guys, let me go back to the politics, I'm like, stir that pot, Tricia. Here we go. That was my first thought. And I'll say snakes and dragons. I mean, that's a biblical reference actually as well. Snakes and dragons. If you
Sure.
don't know about that, that's a great book to go read and find out who those characters are in that play, right? As Nelson would make an allusion. All right, Will.
I just kind of wanted to go back to David described fractional reserve banking for us, and it really is counterfeiting. It's actually worse than that, worse than counterfeiting from what Tricia was just sharing with us. It's kind of like in Office Space, the way it works is, if you remember, if you guys have seen that movie,
Yeah.
the guy has the scheme to skim off a tenth of a penny from every transaction. That's essentially what's happening with everybody's transactions throughout the fractional reserve banking system, which is where the wealth is coming from for the bankers and those closest to the creation of the new money. Well, historically, counterfeiting has always been punished with the death penalty because it was stealing from literally everybody else in that economy. It's showing a complete disregard for everybody, all of your fellow citizens and man. That counterfeiting, the commercial banks are perpetuating this counterfeiting, and it's and embezzlement and how they move the funds. Like, hey, we're not giving you your money out of your account. Your money is gone. It's out doing something else. So we're going to take money from someone else's account to redeem your check. That's embezzlement, which is kind of what's preventing the runs on the banks. And it's all made possible by fiat currency and legal tender laws enforced by the state, kind of coming back to the libertarian that we were view that we were talking about before. Going back a little bit to where we started, what we can do about this, what's the proper response, the sword. I think before we can talk about a response, we have to properly define it, which is what we've been heavily talking about here. We need to show people that this is evil and it's harming them and it's causing them to harm other people in participating in it. And only when we've rightly identified for that for people, and when people accept it and realize it, well, then once we know what is going on, we'll know what to do. And like Richard said, IBC is Austrian economics in action. One of my favorite quotes that's been really impactful for me about this. It's just on the back of the How Privatized Banking Really Works. I actually have it pulled up here, so I'm just going to read it so I don't butcher it. What if there was a solution to government intervention and our current money madness? What would you hesitate 1 minute in wanting to know what it is? Of course not. No one would. The problem is so pervasive that a solution seems impossible, and yet there is a solution. The solution's only requirement is the action of a single person acting in a manner to help only himself, but in so acting ultimately helps all of society.
A great synopsis. Nelson, people used to ask him, well, how do you tell people about this concept? How do you find out if they're interested? How do you prospect? All these kind of things. And Nelson say, well, it's real simple. I say, you ever have the gut feeling something is fundamentally wrong in the financial world we live in? Yeah. Give me $20, buy this book. Okay. That's what he would do. And he would have a book on hand and, say, give me $20 to buy this book. And it was that simple because he wanted to see, does this person already feel disconnected with the system? Do they already have something in their heart, in their mind, in their soul that says, there's got to be a better way, a different way. Whatever's happening out here, I can't put my finger on it. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure what the problem is, but I know something isn't right. Mm. He was appealing to that sensibility of people who had an intangible feeling, whether they had knowledge or not knowledge, but they had a feeling that something wasn't correct in the system, the systematic way that we operate in the financial ecosystem today. And he wanted only to speak to those people because he knew that if they got their hands on the material, they would understand. And so if you don't know the problem, then the solution cannot become clear. So that's why we focus on understanding what the problem is. Now, there's the problem within your own unique household financial circumstance. And then there's the extension of that problem on the aggregate, on the macro, on the larger economic outlay. So whether you're looking at that level or at the individual level, both problems are connected and both problems are fundamentally the same. It's just a matter of scale. And if you recognize yours first, or if you recognize this one first, either one should be able to pull you towards a solution.
I'll tell you what, Richard, the question, I think this is one of the Bible references in the Becoming Your Own Banker book, is where Jesus asked a guy who'd been sick for like 38 years, do you want to be better? They're just putting the question out there. He could say yes, he could say no. It would seem that there would be an apparent answer, and there was of yes, I do. But the question was still put out there, for that person to decide for themselves.
Let me just follow up on that thought.
Please.
Because I think in people's minds, yes, I want things to be better. Yes, I want to be well. But did Jesus go lift him up and put him in the pool of Bethesda? No. He said, well, then take up your mat. Like, there is action on other people's part. And unfortunately, to keep a populace under control, you have to you slowly take away their freedoms and you make them dependent on your system. So, and I think that's why Nelson, the whole first part of his book is all about changing your mindset. That was such an imperative part of being able to walk this process out of becoming your own banker, because he recognized the situation that we've all just been slowly, as sheep led to the slaughter, right? We've just been pulled along this path and brainwashed to think a certain way. And going back to what Richard said, you have to find someone that at least has a hint of something's not right. I can't put my finger on it, but I know it's not right. And I want things to be different. And then the third piece of that would be, and I'm willing to do the work to make things different.
Again, as I'm processing through our conversation, I know that someone's vetting the concept, someone's in their first year of implementing the concept, and I think they might, some of them, be like me, and again, be very focused on, I've got to get out of debt, I need to build some legacy, I need to be planning for passive income years, retirement, etc. Those, we're, maybe focused right there. as we begin to hear more about these bigger picture issues. And I feel like when I heard Nelson say for the first time, banks are evil, there's a part of me that was probably like, are they really though? But again, just in case folks haven't grasped y'all's good illustrations, if we as individuals did what banks are doing, we've already talked about, well, counterfeiters, traditionally, historically speaking, would be that you're going to get a capital, pun intended there, punishment. Right? Thank you, Tricia. Right? So it's like, if we as individuals did that, and Nelson does that in the book, right? He talks about Willie Sutton's Law. He talks about, well, if you were walking in the mall and you see a robbery, an armed robbery taking place, you're automatically going to know that's wrong. That shouldn't be. Hey, what are you doing? Right? Whereas, if we're just inundated with this propaganda, Nicole, if we're just started in from birth on, oh, this is how things are, because that's where we are at now, Tricia. We're not at the very beginning where these things were being ironed out and we're creating a new country with liberties of X, Y, and Z. And no, we, everybody that's on here and everybody that's listening, we were born into the system such as it is. And if we were an individual doing that, we would be receiving that punishment, but that's how the system works. And I will underline that government equals force. That's something that we've talked about. But at the end of the day, everything that government says, what's it backed up with?
The point of a gun.
Go ahead, David.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say that when we talk about evil, the idea of what money represented was just completely exploited by back in Jekyll Island, where Federal Reserve was created, and the IRS, of course, in turn was created because they all knew they held the gold, and they were going to do whatever they could to make sure that they not only held the gold, but I'm thinking about now like modern day with fractional banking, where this became like a multiplicative version of taking gold and then multiplying it in ways that it was never meant to be multiplied. So now more or almost fake gold could be created that then can be filtered through the system, because I know in Nelson's book, he talks about there's a finite pool of capital. And what the banking system ended up doing was creating that, taking that finite pot of gold and being able to manipulate it in evil ways to now have it be filtered through a system where they're now controlling even more capital than they already were controlling. And that's why IBC, and that's why people implementing IBC, you're using real capital. You're not using manufactured capital. You have saved money from your own capital. The insurance company that you end up having policies through, right? You're now in partnership with them. You're now able to take advantage of what your human behavior of savings, but you're not, unlike the banks where they're basically, they have a fraction of money in reserve. This is real, taking back the gold. But so I'm just trying to tie back into all of everyone's observations about like evil and how it was manifested in a lot of different ways in the banking system over time.
I would extend on that, David, about the tying a little bit to the libertarian aspect. So the Austrian economics component and the libertarian component really connect, in my opinion, with the insurance company here to some degree for several reasons. And fundamentally, everything you identified, gold, fake gold was something that was a problem. People would try to create and pass off gold. And then there was alchemy. Alchemists were trying to always create gold. Midas, the Midas touch, these are things we've heard about. Well, the alchemists exist. They just happen to be central bankers. They have created the equivalency. So alchemy does exist. It's around us every day in the way that we use currency now. We just didn't know that was the case. When it comes to doing business with the insurance company, here's what people think. They think big, giant insurance company, and that could set people offhand as well. But what they really need to recognize is You're not doing business with a big giant insurance company. You're actually doing business with everyone on this call. You're doing business with other free people making a voluntary choice to collaborate in a mutually profitable mechanism that is administered by an insurance company. But the insurance company owns nothing. They are simply the yes man. They are the administrator that we've appointed on our behalf as free individuals to each put a little bit of money in so that we can guarantee a giant payout on the end for our loved ones. Here's what's interesting about the insurance industry, and specifically life insurance. Its fundamental element in whole life insurance, if you understand its history, it was created by consumer demand. Free people demanded a tool, a product to help save their families when tragedy occurred. And administrators came up with the idea on how we could pull a little bit from all the people. We could put that to work over a really long time frame and allow it to be there when people were in need. So it was a people-driven product created by people for people in the truest democratic sense of the world through voluntary method, where you would only participate in the idea if you actually loved your family, if you cared about what happened to your family members. So by default, people who care about their families are the ones who will voluntarily participate in the idea. And then they do that en masse. Because if you don't care what happens when someone passes away in your family, you're not going to participate. It's that simple. And so by default, the moment you choose to enter into voluntary contract with a mutual insurance company that you co-own with everyone else, whether you know the other people is irrelevant, you already know by default, they must care about some similar things that you do, because otherwise they wouldn't be there in the first place. And so when I take a policy loan, I'm not borrowing the insurance company's money because they don't own anything. I'm borrowing from a little bit of all of you. And when you take a loan, you're doing the same. And so by rights, you must put some of that back with some interest, because it's for the benefit of your family and my family. And that is the cohesive nature of working together. There is no better system on the planet to allow free contract with other free people. It's already built and designed and administered. And yet you go on Facebook today and you'll probably find a GoFundMe where somebody passed away or some major issue happened. And because they didn't have insurance, because they've demonized the insurance industry as the big, ugly, bad person, we have to now go and create the same equivalent of insurance through a GoFundMe that was already invented 200 years ago. The original GoFundMe exists. It's called life insurance.
And the most original one in this country was the Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia in the early 1700s to care for the widows and the orphans. So
yeah,
that was beautiful, Richard. That was awesome. Yeah.
And Richard mentioned life insurance there, but was any of that about selling life insurance? No, for the listeners, we're talking about providing for each other in community and sound money, and the human problem, which is what Nelson spends the first half of the book talking about. And then on the very first page, he says that this isn't about selling life insurance. It just happens to be the ideal vehicle for both Austrian economics, providing for your families, sound money, fighting back against fiat currency, fractional reserve banking.
Yeah, going back to that real versus fake. I love the visual picture that you're painting for me, Richard, with what you were describing there. When a real person goes out and does what they do in their business or in their career or whatever, they earn real money. I know, again, fiat currency, I got to mention it because we're having this conversation, right? But they earn real money. And then if they choose to protect their family, to buy contract, to build this compounding pool of capital, anything that whole life insurance designed for infinite banking's application does, that is real money in the insurance company, where they're the best version of a yes man, because will you provide, guaranteed for my family this income tax-free death benefit? Yes. Will you provide me uninhibited access to a compounding pool of capital, not by asking somebody's permission? Yes. So it's a yes man in a great way. Real money. They're not practicing that fractional reserve lending that David described for us earlier. So real earnings, real value for a real product from a real company that, like you said, Richard, has been doing this for a really long time. Again, because we're speaking at today's day and age, they've been doing this for over 100 years, well over 100 years, without missing a single year. Not only providing all that value that people wanted by securing financial help for their loved ones when we pass, but also, of course, being able to leverage that in the meantime. It's all very beautiful and it's all very real, in contrast with the conventional banking system, which has all of this illusion of validity. Maybe that's how I'll describe it. Illusion of validity. Well, I'll tell y'all where I'm at. This is fire pit type conversation for me, but I do want to know your strongest questions. If you could ask anybody in this group, hey, what do you think about this? Do that now. If you have something that's really sticking out to you, you knew you wanted to bring up, do that now, because I'm still holding in reserve at least one more thing for the group today, but I want to not inhibit y'all. Go ahead, Richard.
So, following up on what Will indicated, this book is 92 pages. But if you remove all the blank pages and you remove the illustrations, because you can't read them, all right? You take out the epilogue, the glossary, and the bio. Those are all not really part of the core elements of the book. There's only actually about 77 pages. Okay, so the average human being, if you read the equivalent of about 1 page a week, you would read this whole book in a year. 77 pages is really not complicated. But the first 50 pages are the only pages that really matter to understand the concept. Everything after that is about application and validation of implementing the concept. So concept exists from the first 50 pages of the book, if that makes sense. Now, if you break this down, you could take my word for it, or you could do it yourself. It's really up to you. But if you add up all the pages that have to do with human behavior, and you reference the actual amount of pages you read, 33% of this book is human behavior based. So this is a book about human behavior, your behavior as the listener, and then the implementation of your behavior in a financial sense relative to your own family's needs. So your behavior, clarifying it, getting it concise, putting it into directional attitude about what you want and believe to be, how you could live your life financially through exercising those behaviors, and then implementing them with an insurance contract in a constructive, long-term manner. That's really the fundamentals of this book. And so you can't have a concept about infinite banking and become your own banker and separate your behavior. It is impossible because the two are inextricably linked. They are connected, and you cannot do that. By the way, in my personal opinion, everyone is their own banker now. They just didn't know it. They have allowed someone else to handle the capacity of it, and they didn't even know that they could take control back over time. So this now brings the equation of that to possibility in your world. It's saying, look, someone must perform the function. It's already happening in your life. What degree of it can you start to retrieve back under your family's control? And how long can you maintain that control over? That's the core elements that we're looking at here. So human behavior, 33% of the book. Well, it's interesting because economics, I think for me personally, before I learned about becoming your own banker and I learned about the different forms of economic thought, which were completely foreign to me prior to meeting Nelson. I had no idea that there were 3 primary economic schools of thought, which we've already mentioned today. I would hear about economics or an economist on the television. Yes, I'm old enough to remember television. That I thought that all had to do with money. Well, the discussions are always centered around money, but it has actually very little to do with money. It has to do with human behavior and how human behaviors in small, medium, and large aggregates and social overall economics creates impacts on things like money supply, supply chain, all of these things. So economics is all about human behavior. So really, Nelson's book is a simplification of overall economics at the you and me level And then it provides a guide on how you can exert control over your own personal economics to provide value to yourself and your loved ones for a really long, extended period of time. Nelson used to say, he said a lot of things, but one of the things he would indicate is that, look, the time's going to go by anyway. What difference does it make if you apply some of this energy and this effort towards your own connection, your own control? Exert control over your own life. You have to learn how to secede from their way of thinking. There, as the generic, how everyone else is essentially a slave to the system that we've already described to you today.
Which dovetails correctly into Nelson's highlighting Parkinson's law, where, you know, human tendencies towards inefficiency and their and the human proclivities of that basically will make sure whether somebody does succeed in this new way of thinking or not, because that's the variable that none of us here and can really control, and the people that we want to teach over time about the succession away from the system that they may or may not even realize they have abdicated control to someone else in their banking function.
In some ways, it takes me back to John 5, verse 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that Nelson puts at the top of the problem. And you see it says there was a multitude of invalids laying around in the colonnades, waiting for the pool to be stirred so that one person could perhaps get into that pool and be healed. What's interesting to me is if you just picture that in your mind, there's a multitude of invalids laying around. They all think the same way. They're all waiting for a solution. And when Jesus comes along, he shows them, you were looking to the wrong solution.
Well, that was an absolute pleasure, of course, for me to get to sit down and talk to so many folks that are experts in the field of infinite banking, to have these surrounding discussions on Austrian economics, libertarianism. If there's something that we missed from the conversation, please make sure to put your thought, your question, your suggestion down in the comments below. Everybody's contact information will be in the show notes. You can find me at durhamtalents.com. And it's truly my sincere desire that you live and leave a lasting legacy.